We had 5 overviews this year, or going to have 5 overviews, and you were kind of our baptism by fire. You were the first one in week 1 in Houston. So you made it through with all your digits, and I see that your eyes are all intact, so you're not bloody or anything. So you
No,
must
no.
have had at least a survivable time.
It was very survivable. It was a lot of fun. It's been a long time since in fact, I don't think I've ever sat through 60 color guards in a day in one shot. It was impressive to see judges' perspective on doing that all day,
Yeah.
to say the least. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun, actually.
As instructors get into the world class where you have been for quite some time, uh, it's it's easy to kind of forget what the first part of the day looks like. So I'll bet it's been a while. Although I know that you're big in your circuit and everything, so you may have seen more. But generally, like you started with regional A and went into A, and you probably saw more of those classes. I'm guessing you probably see some opens anyway, but maybe more of those classes than you're used to seeing. How was that experience?
It was good. It was funny that you say that. It was actually opposite. They started with Scholastic A first and did Regional A in the middle to break it up,
Oh
which
yeah.
I thought was at first I was curious of why they did that. And then when it was explained to me, just the way critiques would help work out. And I thought, especially after sitting through the day and trying to recall so much madness, I was like, this is actually pretty smart. But when we sat and watched all of them from the get-go, it was like, I'm just, the coffee's not far away and my day's rolling. And then I'm thinking these kids have been going at it for like 2 hours
Oh
already.
yeah, yeah. They
Yeah, it
show
was
up
wild.
for warm-ups really crazy early, and you know
Yeah.
that model. I'd forgotten you'd said that, but that template for that day was started last year, and the judges ended up feeling like they were able to. Their recall was better, exactly like what you said, and they were
Yep.
able to be more accurate with their numbers. So I'm glad that you experienced it. I completely forgot that that
It
was.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I know it might feel weird if you're in those first couple rounds, like, oh, our friends are really far later, but
Yeah,
I think it does an advantage to keep the judges a little fresher with that
I'm
personally.
glad to hear you kind of react that way. That's really great, and from a
Yeah.
purely outsider's viewpoint. Hey, so listen, so you were down in South Texas. In Texas, I grew up in Texas. You grew up in Florida, so we kind of have parallel paths as far as the way the state developed in 3 different areas. And then how through different time periods they consolidate into different regions, and different regions carry different strengths. Did you find that in South Texas you were making like is there one particular comment that you made all day long that might be an indicator of kind of how that region is going?
Well, firstly, let me say that they were all really good. It was people have clearly been doing their work, so it was awesome to see. It made me feel really behind at home. But they came out just swinging away, which was really cool. There's no shortage of production value. Everyone's working really hard to provide great floors, great props, costumes that are pristine. And I really appreciated the effort that everyone put in. And Lord knows them getting on and off the floor is it's a little bit of it's organized chaos and it's pretty fun to watch that. As far as the actual shows went, I think there was some interesting things. And if I can just kind of say that going through the whole day, I've been hearing the phrase forever of, stand out, what makes your show special and how do you and it became really apparent as you sat through the day and you saw so many things that were similar. There were some times where I saw an 8 count phrase on flag get borrowed from somewhere else. And I knew it had to be borrowed because it looked familiar, but then I saw 6 or 7 or 8 other guards do the same 8 count flag phrase. I saw that a couple times on weapon. And I thought, what is this advantage? Is it good? Is it bad? Because it was okay, this is an apples to apples comparison, but it also tend to make it feel like the other thing again. And so I got nervous for them that it was going to get them lost in the herd after seeing something so long throughout the day. So I was a little bit leery of how that was going to play out. Um, there was a lot of really interesting I don't want to say development of show, but the way things laid out, people are a little bit more aware of fragments and working with sections at a time, especially as the classes got a little bit later in the day. Um, but as far as kind of homogenizing back into an ensemble, I thought there could have been a little bit more crafting of that and kind of getting that set up so that we kind of felt like there was an evolution over time. But they handled the parts pretty well for the most part. I think the layering and a lot of those places is going really well. They're getting the idea of bouncing things back to one to the other. There were some things I thought that they could work on too, but yeah, I mean they're good. The kids are going for it. I should say performers. They're all really pushing for it. I thought sometimes uh the performance for the sake of performing, it got a little inauthentic sometimes. It didn't feel as genuine as it could, where it was like, hey, this show is sort of this kind of upbeat, happy thing. So let's do the, I don't want to speak pejoratively of cheerleaders, but it had that kind of open mouth excitement where it just felt, I didn't feel like it was real, and I wished it was bit more authentic. So I think those were kind of the standouts as far as the weekend went. I mean, I could sit here and talk about all the good stuff all day, but those were the sort of
Yeah.
things that caught me off guard as being radar type things. And there's a
You
couple.
identified a great strength that that area has, and about 3 years ago, they had hit a point of development where a lot of their choices were super sophisticated. They were a lot more of the groups were inspired by different art movements, which I thought was really interesting. And then they've carried that into other ways to abstract a performance. But Texas went through a growth spurt, maybe, I don't know, 10 years or so, and they really accelerated with the programming. And what I think is really interesting is that you're noting, the choreographic contribution as it relates to the design and seeing through the process. And sometimes it can be because the same person is teaching a ton of groups, which happens in a lot of places. And you know how I feel about the consultant culture and how that is ultimately diluting
Yeah.
the specialness of our activity. But I mean, it's people got to live, and so of course people are going to work. I just wish they would do a better job about customizing their approaches on certain things. That being said, I'll
Noted,
make,
noted.
make sure this goes back to you instead of me. You totally pointed out what can be considered a vulnerability until you divide the thought by the class. And if you're looking at regional A's and A's, and ultimately it's about the skills and how they deliver those skills. And I'm a firm believer, especially with young groups, about working in utility phrases. You and I, talk about those things, and you teach the following. You know how important it is to be able to call on a phrase that is already kind of universally known in the color guard or in the group, and then be able to kind of apply it to the program. And so you may be seeing some of that. But I think as you get into those older classes, the way you articulated it, if people can be more sensitive to it, um, you know, does it create a strength and a shortcut to achievement, which is why people would do it, or ultimately a vulnerability in, as you related to it, choreographic identity? Because now that identity no longer is yours, it's owned by the three other groups that are using the same phrase, whether it be 8 counts. And you're a smart guy, and I'm an okay smart guy, but I still see those things too. You see the connections and how they're related, and you can find that phrase that is repeated through the day. And I think that's really fascinating how you were able to pick up on that. And I'm hoping people will hear it and go, I think there's a percentage of judges that can pick up on that. And then you
Yeah.
have to ask, okay, so where is that a vulnerability? Is it a vulnerability in equipment? Not necessarily. They just care about skills and achievement. Is it a vulnerability in design? Perhaps that's
Could be,
it.
yeah.
Effect? If all of a sudden you've taken away your specialness of your color guard and you're starting to be a blindy baby and look like every other, Shirley Whitcomb used to always say all cats are gray in the night. If you just have become a gray cat, yeah, it impacts effect too. So even though we're talking about downstairs efforts, I'm just going to point out to our friendly audience, the impact is upstairs. And please be able to talk to the right judge when you go into your critique situations.
Well,
Hey,
and
go
if
ahead.
can I interrupt real quick? What I thought was interesting too was, along that same line was that when you talk about blending and all those things, that also every count can't be specific to your program. That would be really difficult to do.
Right.
But it made it feel again like it was just something that you pulled into this very specific show idea because it was B flat at that point, and we all knew what B flat was.
Yeah.
And that's where I started feeling like we had lost a little bit, in terms of like, oh, this show, oh, I saw that. I feel like I just saw that a few minutes ago. And then what was interesting is I have not great recall. I would make a terrible judge, but as you can recall a little bit. And then as the day goes on, then all of a sudden the backside of that starts going the other way. And I'm like, okay, what was that group? Oh yeah, they did the behind the flag. Oh yeah. Wait, was that the other group? And so I had a really hard time recalling throughout the day. So, you
Yeah.
know, maybe that's just my own inadequacies. Who knows?
I think that's interesting. And I think that and I'm going to call you kind of an audience proxy in that moment, is how it goes through that filter of memory. And then where does that fall when it comes time for you to be remembered when the judge gets to adjust their scores at
Right.
the end of your round? And I think that ultimately the lack of recall can be a huge vulnerability. Um, Programmatically, that area is really, really good too. And you're totally right about the production values. Historically, that group is, or that area, most of Texas is ready really early.
Yeah.
Uh, and they may be coming back to adjust or fulfill, which we talked about in another video. But most of them really look prepared and like they ordered their stuff like last season and they knew what
I
they were going to
know.
do in the
Just
middle of
ready
the
to
fall. You know?
go. Yeah. I'm
I
like, I
think
gotta
that's good.
take my tear the calendar month off early for me.
Well, and I think you're right to feel it from your SoCal, because our process here used to be especially, but still a little bit is delayed. We used to have band go into mid-December. Now, thankfully, it's over by December 1 typically, but we're still behind when you consider those people that are done mid-November.
Yeah.
At least 2 weeks. And I think ultimately we're just so used to our patterns. And there are other parts of the country that are in the same way, where they work on this delayed, really organic process. And ultimately, when they get to the regionals, can be a vulnerability. Did you get a sense of regional strength, regional vulnerabilities? You want to talk about any of that?
To be fair, it's gonna be difficult to compare too much of what I know out here because I show up 20 minutes before the show's over, walk in and go back to the parking lot. But one I thought was a place that could have made up some real ground for a lot of the groups, and again, I know it was early in the regional calendar,
Yeah.
was the crafting of primary focuses. And not to sound super wordy, I thought that there were some really great events. There was no shortage of talent when there were places where we had to follow a focus that would shift around. I thought we could have done a better job at times of going, no, look over here, no, look over here. And that's not to say follow the bouncing balls. I think they wanted us to look there, but it wasn't always easy.
Yeah.
And some of it was really, I think, simple to fix or simple to continue creating. For instance, if there was a primary focus that happened over here and then this one was going to pop up, sometimes they would kind of move through it. And it would just be a matter of just getting still for just a split second to finish that moment and then to keep going on. It
Yeah.
was really just kind of tidying up, which is why I didn't know if it was a time of season thing or if
Yeah.
it just wasn't on their radar. Um, some of the simple tools of form direction or spacing or speed of choreography or direction of choreography that just would have helped send things a little bit better. Where I think, the use of the room would have been a little tidier had they just been a bit more considerate of that. Um, that felt like something I would have wanted to dig in if I was there.
Yeah, totally. And you never know when you look at it whether that is attached to a sensibility or an aesthetic of whomever is designing or choreographing,
Mhm.
or like you said, perhaps it's a point of development. They don't have a sensibility built in about those things. And you're absolutely right. And you're talking about all the things I talk about, which are the differences between someone who links skills together and then people who can choreograph a moment and understand that moment and the build in and out of it, and then the shaping of the moment itself versus people who just know how to write vocabulary. And there is a difference. And the choreographic effort contains both responsibilities. And it's the linking of skills and creating vocabulary that people all feel they understand, whether they do or not. And then it is the other on how that information gets upstairs and how it's sculpted and shaped and suited to the moment and the aesthetic and the overall feel of the moment. That seems to escape a lot of people, and people, because they assume that's not necessary, it is slowly becoming unimportant. And I think it is the difference between good and great choreographers and people who are simply considering themselves choreographers that know how to link skills together and fill time with busyness and
Yeah, that makes
frenetic
sense.
energy, which is can still be valuable, has a value, but is not fulfilled value.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
you understood that.
Yeah, no, totally. And I thought that, and that's a good point because my other thought is that there were some great production of props and things like that that were involved, and even just some of the storyline. And I remember thinking back on one of the breaks, kind of about my own stuff, and it's easy to be sparked or inspired by an idea or a thing that you're working with. We're doing the alphabet, so we have to talk about letters, but then I think at some point the discovery process didn't continue of going, well, what else can we do with them? And what are all of the other options I've not considered? And I didn't think that the storylines always got beat up enough where you were, you go through all the wrong versions before you go, okay, yeah, that was fun, but we can't do that one.
Yeah.
And I think we stopped short in a couple places where I think you could have kept evolving some ideas a little bit deeper. Part of that's just story maturation and continuing, but part of it is also the exploration of the people who are trying to create the thing, and I think
Yeah.
because again, by the end of the day, I was trying to consider the groups that stood out. There were a lot of ballads, a lot of very pretty music. And the things that started coming back to my memory were stark color choices, scale of set design, interesting choreographic ideas or performance identities that then spoke to something different than just
Yeah.
if we're going to talk about a ballad, just the pretty approach versus something that maybe has a rich meaning to it. Those were the things that stood out to me more at the end of the day than the other things.
That's fascinating. And then I didn't look at the full schedule. I know that you had just a very few, I think two world-class groups
Yep.
and a couple of opens. Did you feel like, the strength went up through the classes? Historically, the A's are super strong, and we have to review. So I saw the top two, and they're certainly really strong, remarkable, and really interesting conceptually. Um, did you feel like that same type of strength went through the classes through opens and worlds as well?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing that caught me off guard was how good all the performers are from honestly, even the regional A teams up to the world teams. It seems like the performers have taken even a bigger leap sometimes than the designers. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I
Yeah.
think the designers were already here, so the performers seem to be catching up on their abilities. Um, and certainly going into the world class, I mean, I was blown away at the talent of the performers. It's always nice to see other teams who are kind of working in the same zone
Yeah.
and in terms of trying to create speed and excitement and energy, and they're great. I mean, it was good to see the performers really push. And of course I had comments for both of the world teams that were there and things that I thought would be helpful to them. But again, it's just my opinion and my thoughts. So, you
Sure.
know,
Well, it sounds like you had a great experience, and I'm really, really
good.
glad you were there. It sounds like the information you were able to give the units was really helpful as well. I think your observations you shared with us today are super informed, and they're really nuanced, and they really are hitting on things that are really important to the activity where we are in our collective point of development. You've certainly hit on a couple of things that are separating success to great success.
Hmm.
And I think that it's really valuable what you've said, and I'm so glad that you were willing to share that from your super fan perspective, which I think is one of the most helpful things that come from us old guys. Super fan perspective, and I know how much you love the activity, and I appreciate you being willing to give back in this way. I know that it's super helpful, and I really appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks. I was thrilled to go, and I got through all my commentary on Saturday, so Sunday I just got to sit and watch and just geek on all the cool stuff. So thanks for letting me go.
That's great. I appreciate it. Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Bye.